You guys will follow along with your recipe. I will go in the kitchen and do a live demo for this. When you look at Canvas, you'll see week 7, already week 7. So remember that we have home cooking labs every week. And I like to have them lock on the following Wednesday. But the following Wednesday of this week is spring break. So you may notice that you have your lock date is March 31st, which is the week after spring break. So I'm not making anything due, or I'm not having anything lock over spring break. So keep that in mind. You have technically 2.5 weeks to do a cooking lab. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is week 7. When we return, it'll be week 8. And those are the last 2 cooking labs. I'm not doing a cooking lab for the final week. So there are only 2 more cooking labs for the quarter. So take advantage of spring break. If you can maybe do a cooking lab this week and then do one over spring break, or just do 2 of them over spring break, because again, this won't lock until after spring break, the 31st. But utilize that time wisely. Again, if you want to do 2 cooking labs over spring break, just make sure you document them well. And then you can have them all done for the quarter. And then you'll see you have garlic Parmesan breadsticks recipe. And there's just a link to get you a copy of your recipe. If you want to pull that up while I get attendance put in and then move into the kitchen. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing your garlic Parmesan breadstick recipe. We'll get this one filled out. Then at the bottom, you should see your garlic cheese mix. I think this one's filled out for you. With this, I do have a 12-minute rise time and like a 12-minute bake time. So if I run through this quick, don't worry. We have lots of time to pause and go over this with our rise time and our bake time. So don't worry if I'm going too fast. There's lots of time to go over. You can also put stuff in the chat. You guys have also been really good about putting stuff in the chat and getting that answered. But just know there is lots of downtime. I can go over stuff with our bake time and our rise time. So I'll just get into it with my step one that I want to preheat my oven, of course, 425. And with this recipe, I am going to use my stand mixer. I'm going to use the dough hook for this one. Everything else we've used, well, this one was the butter. We had the video for butter. We use this one for cookies. So I'll use the dough hook for today. But also note, you do not need to have a mixer. You could certainly do this with a just a bowl and a wooden spoon or a bowl and a spatula. A mixer is not essential to get this one done. Do not need a mixer at all. It's not going to spend much time in there. So I want to gather my first ingredients. So if we take a look at step 2, in step 2, it says in the bowl of a stand mixer, add warm water, yeast, sugar, and salt. So your first blank, step 2 is yeast. So how much water? I'm going to need 3/4 of a cup of water, 3/4 cup of warm water. It says from 105 to 110 degrees. My tap water usually gets pretty hot, hot enough anyway. So I am going to temp my water with my thermometer just to make sure it doesn't get too hot, because it does get, like, if you let it run long enough, it gets to like 140 or something. It's super hot. So I don't want it too hot. I don't want to kill it. I don't want it not warm enough. I don't want to not wake it up. If your water doesn't get hot enough from the tap, that's fine. You could always microwave it, but just be aware that I like to microwave them kind of at slow increments. 10 seconds here, 20 seconds there. Don't let it go too crazy, because then if you end up something too hot, then of course you have to wait for it to cool down or balance it out with some cold water, and it kind of takes a little bit longer versus just doing a few seconds at a time. So I'm going to get my 3/4 cup water and temp it from my tap here. Okay, water from my tap. It's just above 100. That's good to go.
Excuse me, Lofter.
3/4 of a cup.
I might have to go pretty soon because I have an appointment.
Get that in to the bottom of my bowl. And you don't need a mixer bowl. And then now I like to sprinkle everything on top. I don't really like big clumps of anything over my water. So I want to sprinkle things on top. So my sugar is half a teaspoon of sugar. I do a 1/4 teaspoon salt, a 1/4 teaspoon salt. And my yeast is 1.5 teaspoons. So with step 3, it says gradually, or no, sorry, we're still looking at step 2. I've just added all those things together, my warm water, my yeast, my sugar, my salt. So I just want to stir and combine using the dough hook. I'm going to just do this manually with my hand. I tend to get a little better results if I'm just kind of stirring. It's a little bit more efficient because the dough hook is meant to bind dough together and knead dough. So if I just do that step to get everything mixed together, just kind of manually by hand really quick, I end up having a little bit better results, I've noticed. But then now I'll use the dough hook to mix everything together to mix my flour. So I'm going to add my flour. 2 cups of flour. And this is a small enough recipe. I'm going to just add the flour kind of all at once. If this was a bigger recipe, I might want to add my flour in stages. So step 3 says gradually add in the flour until dough pulls from the sides. So step 3 blank is sides. I want to pull away from the sides of the bowl and sticks to your finger just a little bit. So it'll be a little tacky, but I'm going to see a cohesive dough ball come around here and it won't stick to the sides. And I will have to stop and scrape it down a few times. So let's just get it mixing. So I have what I would call a shaggy dough, and it will eventually come together. But I know what's happening is that just the wetter part of the dough is getting stuck to this dough hook. So I'm just going to use my spatula, move everything around so that the part of the dough that's a little bit wetter can start incorporating all this stuff that's a little bit drier. Pull this down one more time. It's not as wet. I can do that with my hands, but I'm still getting lots of kind of dry crumb at the bottom of my bowl. So I'm going to see what I can do to get that incorporated. So my dough ball has definitely pulled away from the sides of the bowl. I do have a little bit of unincorporated stuff here. Not super pleased about. So I'm going to kind of toss this around a little bit more and let that dough hook incorporate it together. But I have a good sign here because it's still like wet enough that when I feel it, I touch it, I can feel that it's going to pull up that dough or the crumb on the bottom. But it's not super wet. Like it's not a sticky, wet dough. It's still a dry-ish dough. I can touch it. It's not sticking to my hands. All right, I'd say that's what we're looking for. So it's a dough ball. Like I said, I can still touch it. It's not sticking to my hands. It's not like a big mess to where I can't touch it without having floured hands. And then my dough or my bowl is pretty clean, is meaning like it's not like a huge sticky mess in there. A lot of that flour has come into the dough ball. The dough ball doesn't stick to the sides. It has pulled away from the sides. So I'm going to get this covered and rise for 12 minutes, as step 4 says, and then we'll go over some of these blanks. Okay, so what I did with step 4, cover bowl and let rise 12 minutes or until doubles in size, to see it double in size. I usually don't see a giant increase in the size, but I do feel a big difference in like the elasticity of the dough, which is a good sign. But that blank there for step 4 is doubles. So step 2, the blank is yeast. My warm water, yeast, sugar, salts. Step 2 is yeast. Step 3, the blank is sides, because I want to have the dough pull away from the sides of the bowl. Step 4, I cover bowl, let rise for 12 minutes until doubled in size. All right, so then let's go over our amounts. 3/4 cup of warm water. 3/4 cup warm water. And your recipe should indicate there it's like 105 to 110. And that's usually a pretty good range. 115 is acceptable. I wouldn't really exceed it. Pushing 120 is really pushing it, that you might kill that yeast. So you do have a bit of a window here. But like I said, I wouldn't really push it past 115. So 3/4 cup warm water. 1.5 teaspoons active dry yeast. 1.5 teaspoons of the yeast. Half a teaspoon of sugar, just half a teaspoon of sugar. A 1/4 teaspoon salt, just a 1/4 teaspoon salt. And 2 cups of flour. 2 cups of flour. One and a half teaspoons of yeast. 1.5 teaspoons of yeast. Water and sugar. You guys can be putting this in the chat, not privately to me, but if you put it publicly, then someone else might be able to answer it for you. So your water is 3/4 of a cup. Water is 3/4 of a cup. 3/4 of a cup of water. 3/4 cup of water. 1.5 teaspoons of yeast. 1.5 teaspoons of yeast. 1/2 teaspoon of sugar. Just 1/2 teaspoon of sugar. 1/4 teaspoon salts. 1/4 teaspoon salts. 2 cups of flour. 2 cups of flour. All right, let's take a look at our garlic cheese mix. And this one should be filled out for you. But I still have some time on my rise here. So it's just 3 tablespoons of melted butter. For working in the classroom, I do have a proof box. So I do have this like giant warm box that I put my dough in. That's what I put my butter in, but it's got temperature gauges on the bottom. So for the classroom, I do have that giant proof box that I let everything rise in and stay warm in. I'm fortunate to have that here in the classroom. A lot of professional bakers will have one of those, or professional kitchens, especially if they're baking a lot of their own things. So that's where I put my butter to melt. You can put it on your stove, let it melt on your stove, or microwave it. If you wanted to microwave it, you could certainly do that. But of course, we want melted butter because we're just going to be making kind of a sauce spread with all of these things to put over our warm finished breadsticks. So I need a tablespoon of Parmesan cheese. And I just get this granulated like Parmesan cheese in the bulk section at Winco. And then I freeze it. But it's the same stuff that you get at the jar with the green lid. Either way works, but I can get that at the bulk section at the grocery store. Like I said, I freeze it, but it's nice because I can buy a ton for classroom needs. And 1/2 teaspoon of salt. If you're using salted butter, you might want to lessen the amount of salt. So if you've already got salt in your butter, you might want to use less. 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. And then I have 1/2 teaspoon of parsley, basil, and oregano, all dried. Again, I buy these at Winco, the bulk section. I just refill my containers. So nice and easy. If you don't have and don't want to just buy a small quantity of all these herbs, you could certainly use just an Italian built blend, an Italian spice blend. So if you happen to have an Italian spice blend at home, that will work as a great substitute for all three of these herbs. For the parsley, the oregano, and the basil. Is that what I have? Yes. An Italian spice blend would work as a great substitute to substitute these three. And then I am going to spread it around with my pastry brush, but right now I'm just going to stir it with my pastry brush. And I'm going to keep it in my warm environment. One thing that tends to happen in the classroom, because the classroom is so chilly and drafty, is that students will make this early, and then by the time their breadsticks are done, the butter has solidified because it's too cold in here, because just when butter gets cold, it wants to get hard. So if I could leave it on top of my stove if I wanted to, that would be a great spot to put it. I'm just going to put it back in my proof box, and that's okay. If it does get solidified and you're ready to use it, you could always just pop it in the microwave super quick to melt the butter again. Someone says, does it matter if you get organic ingredients? No, nothing should change if you get organic ingredients. One thing that I haven't worked a ton with is like substitutes, like butter substitutes. There's a difference if you're just getting butter versus getting like a non-animal product butter, like a margarine or something. But they should work the same, because if it's still melting and getting you a nice glaze on the top, you should be good to go. But organic ingredients nothing should change there. All right, I got 2 minutes left on my rise time. And get my parchment paper fitted on my sheet pan. Just a standard sheet pan, my parchment paper, just kind of like how I did cookies. Okay, 12 minutes rise time is over. So like I said, I'm not going to see a ton of rise. I see a little bit of rise to it and a little bit of stick to the bottom of my bowl, but that's okay. It's not that bad. But what I feel more than anything is how this dough is kind of relaxed and it's really elasticy. I feel like I can pull it, which is a good sign for yeast dough. I don't want it to kind of spring back. I want it to be elasticy and soft. It feels really soft. And then again, I don't have floured hands, so it's not sticking to me. That's another good sign. All right, so step 5 says remove dough from bowl and place on a clean, lightly floured work surface. Lightly floured work surface. I really do not need a ton of flour. That is all I'm putting down, and that's really to kind of press out my dough here. It's not a ton of flour. I feel like the more flour I have, because I'm going to make a breadstick, I eventually want to roll these out. The more flour I have, the more difficult time I have rolling them out. If I have too much flour, I can't roll them. I end up just sliding them across the table. So literally just a little bit of flour. And it says roll dough into a large rectangle about 1 inch thick and cut into 8 strips with a bench scraper. So I have my bench scraper, and I am not even rolling this. I'm just going to pat it out. Something that resembles a rectangle will just help me get even strips, 8 even portions. But I don't even have a rolling pin here. I'm out anyway. All right, so now that I have something like a rectangle, I can get my 8 portions. So again, I'm just gonna use my bench scraper and try to get 8 strips out of this. So I cut this in half. So that means I need to get 4 out of here and 4 out of here. So I cut this in half. I just have to get 2 out of this and 2 out of this. So I cut this in half one more time. Once I cut them, I do like to pull them away from their neighbor because they tend to want to stick back to their neighbor. So if you pull them apart, they won't stick. Same thing here, cut it in half and cut it in half again. And then now I have 8 strips here. So step 6 says roll out each piece of dough into long ropes and then twist. Place dough twists on a parchment lined sheet pan. So ropes is your blank on 6. And I have seen this done in many, many, many different ways. I've seen students braid them. I've seen students make like their initials or try to write their name with the dough. Different animals. I've seen them try to do like garlic knots, lots of different things I've seen them do. The most basic, simplest way is I have this rolled into a long, long rope. And now I just double it. So I just double it on itself. So kind of fold it in half. And then I just twist. And then I just get a really nice bread stick twist here. And I really like the twist or a braid because it gives me all these little nooks and crannies that when I go to spread my butter, garlic Parmesan butter mix on there, the little nooks and crannies kind of help give me something for that butter to hold on to. So I like twists or braids. Personally, that's just what I like to do. But you could even just put this on a sheet pan and call it a day if you weren't feeling super creative that day. You could definitely just put one of these on there. So the other thing that's really fun to do with these breadsticks is to add cheese. You can certainly add cheese. So I just have some cheese sticks. So get some thin strips of the cheese stick. And incorporate that into your twisting. And then you'll have delicious melted cheese, so like a cheesy breadstick. So I just kind of put it in the center there, and then I'm just kind of helping hold it there while I twist it. And then I'll have cheese twisted throughout my breadstick. Just kind of see it poking out here, kind of right there. Like I said, like the garlic knot thing is kind of popular. So you could just not do sticks. You could maybe cut this in half and make little garlic knots, or garlic knots with a chunk of cheese in the middle. So when there's a chunk of cheese in the middle, it's nice and melty on the inside. It's all super warm and melty. It's delicious. So I just happen to have some cheese, string cheese in the fridge. So I'm just going to keep incorporating this into my twists. So once it's in half, I kind of pinch it together so that hopefully it stays with my twists. The thinner your cheese is, the easier it's going to be to twist it into your dough. So if you don't split your string cheese down, or if your string cheese chunk is kind of big, it's going to poke out really easily. So try to make them a little thinner. And as you bake your breadsticks, your cheese will start to ooze out and get caramelized on your sheet pan. It's super tasty, but it doesn't make like a giant mess. It usually sticks within its breadstick. So when you pull it up off the sheet pan, it's still intact with your original breadstick. It's not like it oozes completely everywhere. If you don't have string cheese, you could certainly do like shredded cheese. So if you want to do the same thing and then just put shredded cheese here, and then you can just pinch it and try to twist that in, that would work too. Or shredded cheese into a garlic knot kind of thing. So where you make like a little patty of it, put the cheese in there, and then make kind of like a little purse of it. Wrap the dough around the cheese, that works. You can try a different cheese. Maybe you want Parmesan and mozzarella, or maybe you just want cheddar. You can get a little creative with it if you want. All right, last one. So here is my pan of breadsticks. I think this one and this one are the only ones with no cheese on it. I think all the other ones have cheese. So we'll see how they kind of ooze out when we bake them. But before we do that, we'll notice that on step 7, it says cover and let rise 5 more minutes until double in size. So I want to cover, I'll just cover with a towel. I'm going to put them back in my proof box. But I'll cover with a towel just so the tops don't get kind of like dried out and crusty, but a towel will do just fine. And then my bench scraper is another great tool. I can use it to cut my dough, but then just kind of scrape everything up off my work surface to clean up a little easier. And then I can use my Sandy rag to wipe my workstation down. And wipe my mixer down. Okay. Oh, I never started. Let's do that. So we left off with our blank 5. So blank 5 was floured, because I lightly floured, and again, I stress really lightly, not heavy at all, really lightly floured. And you can tell that when if it's sticky, is it sticky and tacky to your fingers? Maybe we need to add more flour while it's still in the mixer before we put it on the countertop. Like I said, if you have to, when you touch it and you pull back a bunch of sticky dough, that's probably a good sign to maybe keep mixing and adding a little bit more flour as you go. Or is it the opposite direction? Maybe your dough is still too dry and it still has lots of dry crumbles on the bottom. Maybe you need to add like a teaspoon, maybe a tablespoon of water, and keep mixing until you get that perfect dough to where it's just a little sticky, not too messy, not too dry. And then our step 6, our blank here in step 6 was roll out each piece of dough into long ropes and then twist. Long ropes. So like I said, I just twisted them. You can braid them, make shapes, make cheese knots, garlic knots. And then we place onto the parchment lined sheet pan. Right now it's resting for 5 minutes, and then we can just put right into the oven. So after it rests, we're going to put it right into the oven for 10 to 12 minutes till golden brown, rotating the pan halfway through. So halfway with all of our baking, remember we're just going to spin that around. I'm going to go on the lesser time, the lesser side of time, so I don't risk burning, overcooking. So I'll do 5 minutes and then rotate, do 5 more minutes. I just want to make sure that I don't overdo my breadsticks, because when they come out, it's not like they're super golden brown everywhere. It's nice to have little golden brown edges and like a golden brown bottom, but they're still pretty pale. They're not crazy dark. And depending on how thin they are, if they're really thin, they're going to get dried out really quickly. So I don't want them to dry out. I don't want them to be super brown. I want them to stay kind of moist and fluffy. And adding that butter at the end kind of helps keep them a little bit moist. Okie doke. So that was 5 minutes. They're definitely nice and soft, and I'm just going to go ahead and get them into the oven. Like I said, I'll do 5 minutes and then 5 more minutes. I tend to have to do more time, but I'm happy with adding more time than having it overcooked and then a product I'm not super happy with. So we have 10 to 12 minutes. Does anybody have anything that needs to be repeated? Any blanks? Or any questions about any other assignments that may be out there?
Can we still turn in the flower assignment if we didn't get it in time, or is it locked?
It won't lock until after spring break. So yeah, you got plenty of time to get it turned in. All right, I'm gonna get some dishes done and I'll be back in 4 minutes to rotate those breadsticks. So the halfway mark, not a whole lot to see. The cheese is starting to ooze out a little bit. But definitely really, really pale, needs lots more time. So I will do 5 more minutes. And we'll take a look at it. Okay. So that is 10 minutes, but I don't have a lot of golden brown happening. I see a little bit on the cheese, but even when I flip them over, I'm not getting a ton. So I'm gonna do 2 more minutes. Two more minutes because I want to see a little bit more golden brown on the bottom, a little bit on the edges, just a little bit more. All right. A lot more golden brown. The cheese is golden brown. This is one that didn't have cheese in it. So it's got some golden brown on it. This other one with no cheese has got golden brown. Obviously the ones with cheese are getting really caramelized. So while your breadsticks are still hot, make sure you get your cheesy garlic butter over the top of them. And also make sure that you're getting some of that herb and cheese in the mix. I kind of use my pastry brush as kind of like a little bit of a spoon because I really want to get some of that cheese and herbs in there. So that when I'm done buttering everything, this cup is going to be empty. A lot of people just want to get the butter out of it and they leave all the chunks behind. Well, the chunks are what's good. It's cheese, it's herbs, it's the salt. We want those on our breadsticks. The other benefit about doing a twist or a braid is that you created these little nooks and crannies to collect and hold this buttery deliciousness that you're spreading on here. So it doesn't kind of just like roll right off. Those little grooves kind of hold things a little bit better than just a stick. And like I said, my cup should be empty when I'm done. So I don't want to get just the butter out of there. I want to get all the delicious herbs and cheese that I just put in there. So then as this sits for a little bit, because some of that cheese did start to ooze out, but as it sits, that cheese will come with that breadstick. And then you look at the bottom, how caramelized that is. Really, really tasty, really, really delicious. That's a good one. So this probably took me about an hour. I didn't really mark my time when I started. But the reason I like this recipe so much is because it's great for even a weeknight. You can make this for a weeknight. And like I said, it took me about an hour and I have breadsticks. So for a yeasted product, like I said, a lot of yeasted products take a long time to rise and punch down and do all kinds of stuff. These are pretty darn quick. You could also, if you're worried about time, you could also make your dough earlier. Make your dough earlier in the day and then just give it kind of like a longer rise time sitting on the counter. Or you can make the dough and refrigerate it. You can make it like the night before and refrigerate it. You just need to make sure that you pull it out put it on the counter or your warm environment. A good hour, maybe hour and 15 minutes before you start working with it. Because you don't want to work with your dough as it's chilled. You do want to get it up to warm again, just as if you put that warm water in there. So you can do it the night before, you can refrigerate it, but just make sure you give it plenty of time to warm up before you start working with your dough. Like I said, a pretty easy yeasted bread product, great to do for a weeknight. Maybe you've got spaghetti night or lasagna coming, and you can get it done pretty darn quickly. All right, so that is what I have for today. That's your recipe today.